All right, so have you ever felt like kind of like your Nest thermostat is like it's got a mind of its own right?
Oh, yeah,
It's like battering you for control of the temperature in your own house.
definitely, especially with the algorithms that they have nowadays.
Right. It thinks it knows better than you.
Hmm.
So like, oh, I know when you're cold, I know when you're hot, I know when you're home, I know when you're not, and you're like, "Hey, just let me set the temperature."
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, exactly. You just want it like a normal thermostat.
I just want like a normal thermostat, right?
Right.
So that's what we're diving into today. We've got this super interesting guide from Wholesale AC Services. And they're walking us through how to actually manually control your Nest thermostat,
Yeah, make it behave.
make it behave right. So they
Yeah.
break it down into these 4 steps. The first step is turning off the auto schedule,
Okay.
which seems pretty straightforward, right?
Okay.
But like, are there any kind of gotchas that we should be aware of when we go to do this?
Well, not necessarily a gotcha, but depending on what model Nest you have, it might look a little different,
Oh, right.
like the menus and things like that.
Especially like first generation versus like the newer ones.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah,
So always good to, check the instructions for your specific model.
makes sense.
Okay.
Okay, so that's step one. Step two is disabling eco mode. So this is basically telling the Nest like, hey, stop trying to be so energy efficient. Just like do what I tell you. So I'm curious, like, why would we want to do that?
Well, I think, you can think about like if you are, say, baking something and you really need to maintain a precise temperature.
Right.
Or maybe you have some kind of like, sensitive equipment that also needs a very specific temperature.
Mm.
The eco mode fluctuations might actually mess that up.
Oh, interesting.
And I think, sometimes honestly you just want it to be 70 degrees and you're fine with the energy bill being a little
Yeah, I
higher.
don't want it to be 68 when you want it to be 70.
Exactly, yeah.
All right, so step three is tackling the home away assist. This is the feature that tries to guess if you're home or not and adjust the temperature accordingly. And I feel like I've heard some real horror stories about this.
Whoa, yeah, for sure.
Like things not going quite as planned.
I mean, it's like, that virtual house sitter that sometimes forgets the house keys,
God.
I was actually house sitting for my sister one time when she was on vacation, and her Nest decided that I was not home, even though I was very much there. And I walked in, and it was like the middle of January and freezing cold.
Oh my gosh. That's terrible.
Yeah, not fun.
So yeah, you can definitely see why someone might want to just turn that off altogether.
Absolutely.
All right, so then the final step, step four, is resetting the schedule. So this is basically wiping the slate clean and being like, all right, we're starting from scratch. You're going to do what I tell you.
Yeah, like, hey, I'm the boss here.
I'm the boss. So that all makes sense. But I guess the bigger question is like, why go through all of this trouble in the first place? Like, why not just embrace the smart technology and let the Nest do its thing? Why would we want to go manual?
Well, I think it really comes down to the things that they highlighted in the guide.
Okay.
Control, reducing frustration, and even aesthetics, believe it or not.
Okay, so break that down for me. Like, what does that actually look like in practice for someone who's like really wrestling with their Nest thermostat?
So, control, for example, is all about just like, taking charge of your environment. Like when you set that temperature to 70 degrees, you want it to be 70 degrees regardless of what the algorithm thinks.
Right. You want to be the one in control.
Exactly, yeah. And then the frustration, I think, is a big one.
For sure.
I think we've all had those moments where technology just doesn't get us.
Totally.
And those little annoyances just add up over time.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And then there's the aesthetics argument, which I find kind of interesting.
Yeah.
The Nest is a beautiful piece of hardware, but some people might feel like all those smart features and all those notifications are just like visual clutter.
Oh, interesting.
They just want something very clean and simple on their wall.
It's like having a minimalist living room and then putting a giant flashing billboard in the middle of it.
Exactly, yeah.
Sometimes less is more.
Less is more, yeah,
Yeah.
even in technology.
Even in technology. So it sounds like there's some good reasons why someone might want to go manual.
Yeah.
But I think this also speaks to a bigger issue, right? Like, how much control are we willing to give up for the sake of convenience?
Definitely. That's a really good point.
And I think it's easy to get swept up in the promise of smart technology, like, oh, it's going to make my life so much easier. But I think sometimes it's important to step back and be like, okay, what am I actually giving up in this exchange?
Yeah, what are the trade-offs?
Right. What are the trade-offs?
Exactly.
And even something as simple as a thermostat can raise questions about like data privacy and like our relationship with technology as a whole.
Yeah, definitely.
So I guess the big takeaway here is that even smart technology can be tailored to our individual needs, Right.
Absolutely.
And understanding how these devices actually work, that empowers us to make more informed choices about how we want them to fit into our lives.
I think so.
So maybe a little